The federal government's invocation of the Emergencies Act is an unnecessary and disproportionate measure that can violate civil liberties, invades provincial jurisdiction, and creates a very dangerous but precedent for the future, and it's not necessary. So the question then is, why does the federal government, using a power that is not necessary to seize bank accounts and assets, for example, from people arbitrarily, extrajudicially, without court orders based on their opinions or who they've donated to, powers really designed to interrupt things like terrorist financing? It doesn't make sense. That's why Alberta and 6 other provinces have spoken out against invocation of the Federal Emergencies Act. I've said that clearly to the Prime Minister a week ago. We've written to him underlining our reasons for opposing the Emergencies Act. And now I can announce that Alberta will be filing a court challenge to the Government of Canada's invocation of the Emergency Act.
Well, Justin Trudeau's government continues to cop backlash for its decision to invoke the Emergencies Act last week. Alberta's Premier has announced their government will be filing a court challenge to the Government of Canada's invocation of the Emergency Act. Mr. Jason Kenney said he's been outspoken about his hesitation in the Act being implemented and that he wrote to Mr. Trudeau last week detailing his opposal to it. This comes after Prime Minister Trudeau announced last week he would be invoking the emergency's powers for the first time since the Act was passed in 1988. It was invoked to try and quell the Freedom Convoy protests that took place in Ottawa for weeks, which was mostly made up of truckers opposing the government's vaccine mandate. It allows the federal government to ban public gatherings in certain locations and to remove people and property. It also gives the power to the government to tell banks to freeze the accounts of anyone involved in organising the protests. But the decision from the Liberal government wasn't met with enthusiasm. It received copious amounts of backlash from both the left and the right, including the Alberta Premier, who will file the legal challenge this week. The Act is currently still being implemented, and according to the Emergency Preparedness Minister Bill Blair, it will stay for as long as they are required, as the threat still exists. Premier Kenney told Post Media he felt the use of the powers was unjustified in the circumstances, an overreach, a violation of due process. The Alberta government are not wishing to overturn the Act, but to suspend it in response to the protests. The situation in Ottawa is serious. Law and order has to be restored, but the Emergencies Act was designed to come into effect at the failure of the state at a time when it was possible our democratic institutions might fall. However, there is no insurrection or coup. Jason Kenney went on to argue the power to seize bank accounts was designed to interrupt terrorism financing, but instead the Trudeau government is using these powers on people whose opinions they disagree with.